Michael Timoney, Vice President of Secure Payments at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, where he leads initiatives to make payments faster, safer, and more resilient. With experience working on projects such as FedNow, the Federal Reserve's instant payment system, and certifications such as Certified Fraud Examiner, CFE, and Certified Treasury Professional, CTP, Michael combines strategic vision with deep technical knowledge. His work is a reference for those who want to understand the paths of digital transformation in the financial sector, with a focus on responsible innovation and security.
All right, this is finally happening in person. You might have seen some of my interviews. I have managed to go through about 27 of the 28 coaches at the About Fraud community. We're here in Charlotte, in the US, having the first day of Fraud Fight Club Round 2, talking about what matters when it comes to fraud fighting and leaving your logos and egos at the door. So we've had quite a morning, Michael.
Yes,
so thank you so much for joining. It's just so nice to meet you in person without a firewall between the two of us.
Absolutely, glad to be here. Enjoying everything so far.
You are.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your story. For people like Google you out there and go, oh my goodness, Federal Reserve, Michael, all these really important things. How did your career start?
So I actually started in banking, and I worked in the international division actually, which sounded very appealing at the time, coming out of college.
It was something that you thought you were like, I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to make a lot of money,
I'm going to travel the world,
okay.
I'm going to do all that kind of cool stuff. And so I did some of that in my career. I did travel the world, and but then about probably closer to 20 years ago now, I got a call from the Federal Reserve. Well, actually, 20 years ago, I got a call that said, hey, how would you like to learn about fraud?
Okay.
And I said, okay. We need someone that knows payments. I've been in the payments industry for a long time. We'd love to get someone that knows payments to teach them about fraud and help us out. So that's what pulled me in. Once I got pulled in, I kind of got a passion for it. And I figured I was finishing my career at the bank. And then one day I got a call from the Federal Reserve and said, hey, we're really looking to do some work around fraud.
Yeah.
We got your name from somebody in the industry which would be interested in it. So that was 6 years ago. So I've been
Have you ever thought about going from a very corporate, private career to public service?
Right.
And really changing, and going to the guys that make the rules and are investigating and are looking and sound super serious?
I did not.
Okay.
I actually, interestingly enough, you get a lot of calls in your career from headhunters and that sort of thing, right? I always just passed them off. And when it was the Fed, I was like, I never even thought about the Fed. I worked in banking my whole career and never really thought about the Fed. And so then I'm like, I thought they did interest rates.
Yeah,
that kind
you're
of
like,
thing.
I hear about that, they change this thing, they try to keep the economy.
Yeah, they're regulators and they do interest rates. And it wasn't until I actually talked to them that they were mission focused as well. And so they look at their district and they try to look out for the people within their district. So they were talking about you need to create a team to work on fraud projects. So ultimately I accepted, and I've been there 6 years, and now I've hired other people, and they all have fraud background, which the Fed really doesn't have a fraud program. So we are the fraud program within the Fed.
Oh, right. So we're talking 6 years, huge transformational change, big shit, a large organization, known for being a bit bureaucratic and procedural.
Yes.
Establishing a team that is dealing with some of the fastest moving technologies, and as you said, affecting the local people. So let's go back to what is the mission of the Fed for those people out there that still maybe think that they're, the interest rate guys. Or
Right. So primary focus is to have an efficient payment system within the United States. That's probably the biggest one, right? Make sure that the markets are working right. So, all that is the primary focus. So one is to create adjust interest rates, that type of thing, but also just to regulate and supervise banks and that sort of thing, make sure everything's equal for everybody. But then they have a mission side that's really focused on, how do you serve the people within your district? So we have 12 regions in the US, 12 banks, and they each have a region which they serve. And so they look for opportunities to help constituents with that. So if there's fraud happening within that area, what can you do to it? If there's high unemployment in that area, what can the Fed do to help with it? getting into social programs as well. If there's a large population of underbanked or people that are suffering, how can we help them? So that's really the mission side of it, is something people usually don't think about.
For sure.
And when I
something
heard,
that usually doesn't make the news,
it
right?
doesn't
It's
make the
not
news.
as scary.
Absolutely.
It's not, and unfortunately, we know that that kind of stuff sells.
Yeah.
But you are working in a part that is scary, is hitting millions of Americans every day in all sorts of ways that we not only heard here at Fraud Fight Club, but we hear it all the time. That's our daily lives.
Right.
And that doesn't make the news because it's not as sexy or exciting. So
Agreed.
what has been your work in the past 6 years, and tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I first started there, again, we didn't really have a focus around fraud whatsoever. And the industry was really looking to, how do we come up with a way to classify fraud?
Okay.
We were trying to get a good estimate of how big fraud is in the US, and we found that there's some really good measure. So the first thing we really wanted to do was to say, can we classify fraud in a consistent manner so we can get a better understanding of it? Because once you can classify it, then you can build your tools to identify those, where you see the spikes and all that sort of thing. So my team really interacts with the industry. We're a collaborative team. And so we've worked on multiple projects over the last couple of years. We came up with something called Fraud Classifier back in 2020.
So this is back to your point of classifying
fraud,
which we've heard is a huge problem, right?
Yeah.
Because there's all this shame
Yes,
that begins with fraud.
absolutely.
And there is something called shareholder value, which public traded companies and
yeah.
banks would be a little bit concerned about. It's not the kind of thing you want to hop on the news and say, hey, I just lost a bunch of money and my job's to be your custodian.
That's correct.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
so how has it been?
So we released Fraud Classifier 2020.
Okay.
It's been accepted by the industry. We actually had a session earlier today, a deep dive, and we were talking about classification, so the audience was very interested in that. Last year, we actually released Scam Classifier. So, 5 years ago, no one was really interested in scams. Now it's one of the toughest top fraud items that are happening today. And so a year or so ago, people said, hey, can you expand the classifier to include scams? So we have now rolled that out.
And how has that grown? Just being a bit of a data nerd, how has that grown the number of classifications? Because we are talking ingenious people that use their energy, unfortunately, to take advantage of
what
others.
we've seen is people are starting to adopt the model. It's strictly just a decision tree, right?
Of course.
But the reality is that some of the vendors out there are using that and incorporating it into their system. So the Fed, for example, they released a year and a half ago a new faster payments model called FedNow.
Okay.
And with FedNow,
And FedNow is an attempt to say, okay, let's catch up with everything that's happening in faster payments across the world.
correct. So FedNow is a faster payments model, and what they've done is they built the classifier model into it so that when someone reports fraud, it gets reported in that model. So now we're starting to build a consistency of a way to classify fraud. With Scam Classifier, we will do the same, so that we will. And if the different vendors out there and the industry in general starts to accept those models, then we'll get a consistent measure, right? And my goal ultimately is if we can all classify it the same way, if we start to share the information, it will be shared and we'll all understand the information. And I know you're talking about data, but if you all agree on the data fields, then when you share it, everyone will know what it is, right? So ultimately, we think that can really help. And again, we look at other parts of the world and what they're doing, and this is some of the things that they've been doing already.
And in this journey, it's not an easy one. We're talking about steering a huge ship. We're talking about, entities that you would have spent most of your career in before in your previous life. And sharing is not, it is caring, but it's not something they're particularly, prompt to do or really excited to get out there. So how have you been able, not to just a matter of being the Fed, but is this an opportunity where, I often say this in Brazil or my work with regulators, is that this is your actual opportunity to be a catalyst. By being that voice that they kind of have to listen to.
So interesting you use that word. Our team is considered a leader catalyst.
Okay, wow, amazing, this was not planned.
So it is exactly that. Our role is to try and be the catalyst for the industry, to get them to agree or catalyze around a topic and move in that direction. So that is what we do. And so our main focus right now is in scams, check fraud, and information sharing are the three big things that we are focused on, trying to move the industry in that direction. Other countries don't have the same infrastructure as the U.S. We have 9,000 financial institutions. No other country has that. So it's harder to do that.
And they're resilient ones because they've survived a few financial crises, so they're not going to let go of their growth that easily.
Yeah. So it's not as easy as I'd like to think it could be, but I think what we've seen over the last couple of years is that the industry's moving in that direction. They've opened up. So to your point, they're not really open. There's still legal and compliance teams that aren't there. Mm-hmm. But if you talk to the kind of audience of fraud fighters, they're moving in that direction. So we're seeing areas where it's opening up. And I think if we can just pry it open more and more, then I think we'll get there.
What's required to pry it open more and more? Like you talked about some things are required, getting to agreements on, what we call things legally, which is such a human nature.
Yes.
That's why we have names, that's how we identify colors, we do that to kids.
Yeah.
So finding enough that we don't think we need to do that to the other things affecting our everyday users and citizens. So what needs to happen? Great product, great collaboration. What's next on the Catalyst journey? How is tech playing a role?
I was just going to say technology, I think, is where we have to go. Some of the newer technologies, privacy enhancing type technologies, can allow information to be shared, encrypted, in a way that we shouldn't be as concerned about sharing. The other thing that I will say is that we're not asking, we don't need your name and all your bank account number and all that. If we use AI type technologies, you can pull the learnings and share the learnings. So you don't actually have to share pieces of information. Absolutely. But if you can share the learnings and if I learn something and I share it with your organization and you benefit from it, then we both kind of benefit at the end of the day. And so that's, I think, using technology to allow us to encrypt things better, to pull out the learnings. The technology is there that banks are already using it, but the fraudsters use it as well, right? And how do we use this for the good and really find a way to be able to anonymize the data in the sense that if we share it, legal and compliance can't really say to the country, go, yes, we're okay with that.
And they can get on board, right? I think
Absolutely.
we're always talking about how do we use technology to even empower these risk and legal people, and I'm super thrilled here out in the community to see them in the room.
Yes.
To see them partaking in their responsibility and opportunity. How do you look for the next, maybe 6 years on the crystal ball? I know you're still fighting check fraud.
Yeah.
And yes, you heard it right. It's one of the most fast-growing frauds in the United States is check fraud.
Yes.
But how beyond, fighting something that people can recognize?
Well, my goal, the sword that I would like to fall on would be around information sharing. How do we get this country to the point where some other countries are doing it? Some other countries, Australia, some of the European countries have mandated that they have to share information, but they have a very different infrastructure.
Totally. You look at their consumer data rights, you look at their understanding of identity, you look at their federal versus state laws, and just even, as you said, getting people to agree this is a thing.
That's right.
This is the banana or apples, and are we comparing them the same?
Yeah, I think the attitude around fraud is changing, so I think that's going to help fuel our movement in that direction, because it's not a new idea.
No.
It's just we've run into resistance. But I think over the next couple of years, people are going to recognize that we have to do it. I think with some of the newer technology, the argument will be easier from a legal and compliance perspective.
Yeah.
There are already rules there that say we can share, but they're maybe a little gray. So maybe they become a little bit more black and white. And that would be nice to see. But my gut feel is we are moving in that direction. I'm hoping we are over the crest and we're going to pick up speed. Mm-hmm. As an optimist, that's where I'm going, right?
This is what I do. I gotta make this industry cool.
So I think once we pick up that speed, then we'll all be in for a good ride. So I would expect it could be 5 or 6 years before we get there, but I do think that's the direction we're going.
Well, you heard it from him. I also had and shared this crystal ball optimism about, regulation has a huge role to play in helping us define things and helping us understand what the community's built. And I think today, cryptography, computing, and we're not on the verge of the next buzzword bingo, but quantum is coming.
Yes.
We have a lot to learn from the speed in which technology is playing. I hope to see more teams what can we expect and what can people, that are not out there, you've been there in the Fed for 6 years, you've built an incredible team now dealing with some of the coolest and greatest technologies and most importantly helping people. What can, maybe somebody out there that wants some career advice or wants to hear about maybe how they can get involved, what would you leave them with, Michael, as a leader?
So, first of all, I'd say whatever you do, find a passion around it.
Yeah.
Honestly, I thought I had a passion. Look, let me put it this way. I started out going to school for architecture. And I got a
No way.
And I got a degree, and I worked in that field for a couple of years.
Okay.
And then I decided it wasn't for me. So I went back to grad school, I got a different degree, and decided I was going to do something different.
Beautiful self-awareness.
Right?
Of being able to say, hey, I got many skins, I live many lives, so my best friend in the world had a similar journey.
So once I recognized that, I never knew that I had a passion for this until I had the opportunity. And once I got in it, it was one of those things where I said, wow, this is great, and you're helping people, but you're also trying to stop bad guys. I never thought I'd be in the fighting bad guys business.
You never thought you were going to wear the hero costume, right?
Exactly.
Nobody thinks this like cool nerdy job is actually the hero job.
Exactly. So to me, if you find something that you're really interested in, then focus on it. I think giving back something to our environment, to the people, is a good thing. I never thought I would be in a mission-focused business, but I am. And I know when I retire, I'm going to continue to do what a lot of the folks here are doing. They look for ways to help, even though they're volunteering. And so I'm happy, hopefully, that I made a little dent somewhere along the way, that, for the good. I would, for anyone that's getting out of school or trying to start a career out, find something you enjoy, but also be open to change, because I changed multiple jobs within the organization that I was at, and then I found one, and now if someone asks me to change, I'd probably say no. Well, I know I would say no, because this is what I want to do.
But you allowed yourself the space to bloom and find
I did,
Yeah.
and I found the right thing, which is great. Not everyone gets that, but I think.
But you didn't stop pursuing it.
No, I absolutely did not.
Subliminal message
Yes,
here,
yes.
if you haven't heard it.
And like I said, I will tell you, what I do today, even 6 years ago, I wouldn't have thought I'd be doing. And so today, I do a lot of public speaking. I'm an introvert at heart, and I never thought I'd be up on the stage on a regular basis. And you were up there doing it too. And so for me to do that, it obviously, I overcame that fear because I enjoy the work so much. So you can accomplish great things if you believe in it, I think. So.
And if you believe in it, he was an introvert at some point in time, and so was I.
Oh, I still am.
But it's incredible what happens when you come from a place of authenticity and passion.
Yes.
I think you're allowed to leave some of the fears or the imposter syndromes and sort of the beliefs that we have. You're out there trying to make change. So Michael, thank you so much for not only being a coach, for making your time here with me in this couch, having this conversation, and sharing some inspiring notes.
Thank you, Monica. My pleasure. I enjoyed it. Thank you, everybody.
We'll leave the notes and we'll leave the Fed page for you who might be looking for talent and to work with people that are inspiring, looking for change. Thank you so much for watching.